Now, Sita and Draupadi are very different characters. If Draupadi has a problem, she goes at it like this, right? If Sita has a problem, she'll see if she can maneuver around it to cause the least amount of disturbance. Now, when she needs to cause disturbance, she will. She will. She'll tell Ravan exactly what she thinks of him. At the end, she will tell Ram that what he is asking her to do is not right. But when possible, she finds a, a solution that is good for everybody.
Hey guys, welcome to the Literary Lounge, where we have honest conversations with authors about life, literature, and the spaces in between. Before I introduce a guest author, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, I want to share that speaking with her has been a dream of mine ever since I first read her first novel, which was about a decade back. Today, that dream has finally come true. With that, I'd like to introduce the author of the day, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, the famous author of Palace of Illusions and the Forest of Enchantments, who has joined us all the way from Houston. She's an Indian born American author, poet, and McDavid Professor of Writing at the University of Houston Creative Writing Program. Her work has been published in over 100 magazines and anthologies, including The Atlantic and The New Yorker, and translated into 30 languages. In 2015, the Economic Times included her in the list of 20 most influential global Indian women. That's huge. And two of her novels, The Mistress of Spices and Sister of My Heart, as well as the short story, The Word Love, were adapted into films already. Today, I'm thrilled to have her here with me to discuss her novel Independence, which was also the book of the month at the Meladunix Book Club. Oh my God. Yes, I have the book with me as well. I have this cover of the book, and I absolutely love this cover. First of all, thank you so much, Ms. Divakaruni, for joining me for this discussion today. It's an absolute honor for me to have you here and a dream come true in so many ways. How are you doing, and what have you been reading these days?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me. It's a pleasure for me to meet readers who are, serious, intelligent readers, and of course, people who have enjoyed my books. So a big hello to you and to all your book club members. So right now, I am reading some fantasy novels because I have started writing my next book, and that's going to be a fantasy adventure. And it's going to be kind of drawing upon Indian traditions. A lot of fantasy is based kind of in a Western world, but I want mine to be based in Indian mythology, Indian magic, Indian folk tales, all of those things. So I'm reading books like The Fourth Ward and Shadow and Bone. So just to see what they're doing with world building.
Oh my God, that is so interesting. I haven't come across any Indian novel that explores fantasy like that, and I am super excited to pick your book now next, whenever it comes. What are we expecting as a timeline? Is it supposed to come out next year?
Well, it will be finished by next year. So it'll probably come out a few months after that, either by the end of next year or maybe the beginning of the other year, because I got slowed down. As if you've been following my Insta page, you will know that I broke my arm and only recently it's out of the cast. So that slowed down the writing. But I used that time to do a lot of extra reading. So no time
I
is.
get that. How are you doing now? Are you better?
Yes, thank you. Yes. After breaking an arm, I have to go through a lot of physical therapy, which is kind of painful. They pull your arm, they push your arm. But it's all getting better. So I feel very thankful that it wasn't any worse because it could have been.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're feeling better, and now that you're able to write your book again, I'm sure that we're going to get something super exciting to come, even if not next year, whenever it
Fingers
comes.
crossed. Fingers
Yes,
crossed.
I'm very sure it's going to be as good as all your other works, because whatever I've read, I have been so impressed. Literally, The Forest of Enchantments was launched in the bookstore, and I was the first person to, I mean, go there and buy the book because I was super excited to read that book. I was,
Thank you.
so I mean, I'm absolutely thrilled to pick up whatever comes next from you.
Thank you. Well, while you're mentioning Forest of Enchantments, these two books for me are pairs. Ever since I wrote Palace of Illusions, I've been wanting to write Sita's story, but it took me a long time to do the research and really feel comfortable with Sita's character and the whole world of the Ramayan. So I'm so glad that you liked it when it came out.
I absolutely loved it. And I'm going to dive deeper into that as well, both Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments in my questions in the next coming questions. But I want to touch base a little bit on the book, Your Last Queen, The Last Queen, that is supposed to get it's turning into a movie. I heard from your Instagram page again. So what's happening with it? I'd love to know more about that. And has your schedule gotten busier with that? Yes.
Well, it's exciting because it's been optioned. I think there will be a point where I'll be asked to give more feedback. When it was first optioned, yes, I spent a lot of time discussing back and forth, and they were like, well, what are the images in your mind of the palace, of the queen, of uh, Jinda Kaur while she was growing up? She grew up in a very rural environment. So I would send them images that kind of fitted my mind, just images, photos from the internet. And they asked me questions like, who would you like to play this role? And so I gave them lists of names, but now they are incubating it. They're figuring things out. So right now I'm not doing very much, but hopefully again, once they've figured out who is acting in which role and they start working on the screenplay, or I think they're already working on the screenplay, but when the screenplay is more finished, I think I will be asked to give some feedback. But meanwhile, I'm just excited imagining.
I'm super excited too. I mean, I'm wondering who would be the main lead of the book
Yeah.
because that would be super exciting.
Yes, I think they're also taking their time to find out who would be the best person. And then, of course, if they get a really high profile actor, they have to check with their schedule as well. So I've been told that all this will take some time. So I have to be patient. And so I hope my readers also will be patient.
I know. I mean, I am sure that they'll all be patient, but they're also super excited for it to come out. Which actress are you hoping to play the lead role?
I'm keeping an open mind because I also think so many wonderful new actors and actresses are coming up. So I really don't know. Yeah, I'm waiting just to see what comes up. Yeah. I
Top
put
three
this on
actresses?
my I put this on my Instagram, and our viewers today can also participate. I said to them, who do you think should play the part of Panchali in Palace of Illusions? Who should play the part of Jinda in The Last Queen? And people have been giving me lots of answers, which I'm passing on to the director. So please, anyone who's listening and hasn't participated, just find that Insta reel and add your comment. And I read all of them and I pass them on. So who knows, your choice might become the final choice.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure that there would be a lot of comments and a lot of options would be coming up from the audience as well. And you never know. Sometimes there's an actress people are not thinking about, with their conscious mind, and they just think that maybe that's the perfect fit, and the
Exactly.
suggestions might get turned into a real deal.
Exactly. That's why I'm asking for suggestions because you never know, right? Even people who are even producers who are well informed may just not be thinking about a person who's not so much in the public eye, but maybe a perfect Rani Jinta. So we'll
Exactly.
see.
Exactly. Oh my God. Thrilled for that to happen. And now I'm going to talk about Palace of Illusions. I'm sure that if not anything else, people have read Palace of Illusions a lot. And I have seen so many stories I've personally gifted people this book. My own copy is with a friend of mine. I don't know where it is at this point in time. But I've gifted this book to my friends, to my family members, and asked them to read it. And this made me explore mythology from a very different perspective, leading me to read many other books as well in mythology. And I wanted to ask, what compelled you to give a voice to the famous yet often unheard character of Draupadi from Mahabharata? And yeah, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I have been thinking about this book for a long time, since I was a teenager. And when I was a child growing up in India, my grandfather would tell me the stories of the epics and many other mythological stories. And I was fascinated by the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, which are such wonderful compendiums of tales. But I was always like a little um, I don't know, a little surprised by the fact that my grandfather didn't tell me that much about the women. He would be talking about the men, and even, all the battle scenes and whatever astras they were using. He mentioned the women, but he didn't talk about how they were feeling or whatever. So I went on and read books after that, and it was the same in the translations of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata that I read, that women were not given that much space. And what they were thinking of, what they were feeling, we did not get to see that. And that's what really interested me, because they were such complex characters. As you know, Draupadi is a very complex character, and amazing things happened to her also. So, what would be her reaction? What was her participation? We are just given a blanket line in many interpretations of the Mahabharata. Oh, Draupadi was responsible for the Mahabharata war. I was like, wait, can you really put all the blame at her doorstep? And so I became very interested in really analyzing her character and thinking about how she felt, and what were the things she might say behind closed doors, not just those one or two public statements that the Mahabharata gives us. So I think that was what really interested me. And that's been my project ever since I became a writer, to shine a light on women's experiences and feelings, women's thoughts and reactions to what happens to them, and also to show in what ways are they agents of their own destiny.
That makes so much sense because it's very clear also in all of your other novels, along with Palace of Illusions and The Forest of Enchantments, how beautifully these female characters are brought up. And I think Palace of Illusions has done one thing that I've noticed over the years of my journey as a reader, that it's made Mahabharat more accessible to readers, because I don't know about other people, but I myself had never read the epic itself. But because of Palace of Illusions, I got a chance to read it from Draupadi's perspective, get an insight into what actually happened in the epic. And it made me wonder about what truly transpired during that era. So there must have been challenges when you were working on the novel, especially because not many people have written about Draupadi before, not exactly the way you explored her character. So, what exactly were the challenges that you faced, and how did you overcome them?
I want to start by going back to something you said, uh, which made me feel very happy, which is I really wanted to expose people to our wonderful epics. And I always say to people, if they've read Palace of Illusions, now you must go and read the Mahabharata also, to see, what the original story is and what I did. And the book is definitely based on the epic, for which I have great respect. And it's the same with the Forest of Enchantments. But going back to research, so I had some very basic challenges. Now, once I wrote Palace of Illusions, it became much easier. Those challenges became much easier for Forest of Enchantments, because although they're different epics from different eras, they're set in that mythical, magical, epic world. So once I knew how to create that world, for Palace of Illusions, it was not so difficult to create it. Of course, I had to do more research. So I had to do research on everything that, of course, the epic said, and there were many versions of the epic, so I tried to read several of them. Now, I had to also look at some lifestyle things. I had to find out, what did women wear at that time? What did people eat at that time? What spices were available? I wanted to make it authentic to the feel of that time. How did people move around? What did the insides of palaces look like? How did they heat them? How did they cool them? So lots of like really nitty-gritty details, but those are so important, I feel, when we are writing a book, because they make the book come alive, and also they make it as authentic as possible. So all of those. So one was research on the epics itself by reading the epics, and the other was like looking at the epic world and looking at what historians have surmised from many, many different sources, including archaeological things.
That must have been a tiring process, and of course, a very lengthy one at that too. How much time did you take to research all of this? I'm sure it would have taken a long time.
Yeah, Palace of Illusions took several years to write. So Palace came out 15 years ago. So it was kind of a little ahead of this big mythological wave that has swept Indian fiction, which is very wonderful and exciting. So many characters are being written about, and movies also coming out about people. But it took, for Palace, it took me about 3 years to research and write the book, maybe more than 3 years between the researching and writing. Forest of Enchantments took almost as long because, the character of Sita is so iconic in our culture. And I wanted to make sure that I did an honest and respectable and respectful job with her character as well as the character of Ram and the others. So, and the Ramayana exists in so many versions. People only think Valmiki, but Valmiki was the first. And then there were many wonderful and very talented and respected writers who gave a different spin to the Ramayana. And that is something very wonderful about our epics that we should not forget. Uh, People sometimes nowadays are becoming like only one version of things is correct. But that's not, first of all, that's not accurate. That's really not the Indian way. The Indian way is full of multiplicity and has always invited many different interpretations. And so, if we want to respect the Indian way, we must respect all of these writers who wrote about the epics.
That makes a lot of sense. And of course, I've heard about Valmiki too. I mean, I haven't read the other versions. I haven't even read Valmiki's version, but I did read Forest of Enchantments. So my version of Sita and Ramayan is derived from everything I've read in the Forest of Enchantments. But I do hope that I get a chance to read the Valmiki Ramayan or the other Ramayan for that matter. I did pick up Amisha's book, Sita, after I read your novel Forest of Enchantments, and that had a whole different spin on the story, which was a little more technical. But yeah, very good seeing that we're getting all of these mythological characters come to life in fiction form. It's beautiful seeing that this is happening. And I also had a question on a little different from what we are talking about. But have you watched the recent movie Kalki 2898 AD?
I haven't, but it is on my list of books to watch. I mean, movies to watch. I really want to see it because I think, I will learn something from it to use in my fantasy novel that's coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very beautiful spin on mythology as well. I watched it twice already in theaters. It's that beautiful, and I would definitely recommend you to watch it because, especially because you've written about mythology so much and so much depth, and also because you're working on your next fantasy novel. I'm sure you would love it too.
I definitely, that's on my list. It's definitely on my list. As soon as it becomes available to me, I will watch it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, on that note, I'd like to dive deep into the next incredibly beautiful book of yours. That's Forest of Enchantments. I read it as soon as it was released. I mentioned that to you. and I was literally waiting for it to hit the bookstores. So, for this particular book, what is one piece of feedback or review from your readers that has stayed with you to this day?
Before we jump into the book, I wanted to share one more time this cover with our audience today. And I'm very proud of this cover because I found this ancient painting and I alerted my publisher, HarperCollins, to this, and they were so wonderful. They chose this painting. And I love this because I think it is very central to what is in the book. In most paintings of Sita, she's kind of sandwiched between Ram and Lakshman, if you've noticed. Or they're walking along the forest. Ram is in the front, she's in the middle, and Lakshman is bringing up the rear. But she is truly a powerful and brave and complex woman in her own right. So I said, I want only her, but authentically, I want her in on my cover. And here she is in a forest enchantment, a forest of enchantment, right? So I was very pleased with this cover. And what I wanted to show about her is that she's very strong, that she makes her own decisions. And, over the centuries, she has been misinterpreted as someone who's very meek and mild and obedient, and she is the damsel in distress who's carried away. But if you go back and really read Valmiki carefully, or Krittivas, who is the Bengali writer of the Ramayan, you'll see that she's quite feisty, and she replies to Ram. She will not just obediently accept what he's saying. In fact, he says to her, please stay in the palace in Ayodhya and take care of the in-laws while I go to the forest. And she's like, no, I love you. I will go with you on your adventure. So those were some of the things that I wanted to bring out about the character of Sita. The other thing about Sita is that Ravan, even though he abducts her, does not physically harm her, right? She has so much like inner power that he can't do that. And he begins to really respect that as well. So I wanted to bring all of that out to make her the multifaceted character that she really is, but that we've forgotten.
Absolutely. And I think that makes a lot of sense because in the book also you see her character develop ever since she was a child, and then, so on and so forth. You see her develop into this fierce, beautiful woman, a powerful character, and not somebody who would just listen to her husband and follow him blindly. And even towards the end of the book, you see that she has made a conscious choice to not be with him, and it's not like something was enforced on her. So all of that comes out very beautifully in the Forest of Enchantments, and I absolutely loved all of those sequences. After that, I
Thank
actually
you.
started talking to people about Sita also. That
That's
she's not
wonderful.
that character that you always wondered.
That is so wonderful. And that is my hope, that people will talk about her, they will think about her. And sure, we should have her as a role model, but as a strong woman at the end of Forest of Enchantments, and also Valmiki, when she's asked to go through the fire test, she says, no, I'm not going to do it. It's not right of you to ask me to do it. And she chooses that, even though that means she'll have to not be with her family and her beloved children. She chooses that because she thinks that's the right path and that's the right choice.
Exactly. And that is the beauty of Sita's character. I think that's how it has evolved, and it's very, very beautiful. So, going back to my question, have you received any review of the book that has stuck with you till date
Yeah,
on this
I
book?
think, over the years, I have heard so many readers respond to me saying that, she has really inspired me. She inspired me to stand up against wrong. She inspired me to find intelligent solutions to her problems, because there's an early part of the novel which I kind of like a lot, where Kaushalya, Ram's mom, is having problems because Dashrath likes the other co-wife, Kaikeyi, better. So Sita thinks about, well, how can I improve their relationship? And she comes up with some nice uh, solutions, which I thought was a fun part to write. So I think Sita is always a problem solver, and many readers have come back and told me that Sita taught them to solve problems original ways, in original ways that are not necessarily violent or in your face. Now, Sita and Draupadi are very different characters. If Draupadi has a problem, she goes at it like this, right? If Sita has a problem, she'll see if she can maneuver around it to cause the least amount of disturbance. Now, when she needs to cause disturbance, she will. She will. She'll tell Ravan exactly what she thinks of him. At the end, she will tell Ram that what he is asking her to do is not right. But when possible, she finds a, a solution that is good for everybody.
Wow, that is such a beautiful differentiation between Draupadi and Sita, and now I'm seeing them both from a different light. I thought they're similar in characteristics, but I think this gives a whole new perspective to me of them both. Very beautiful.
There are two models, I think. There are two models for us as women to think about and use and incorporate into our lives. Sometimes we need to be like Draupadi, but a lot of times we can be like Sita and get our way without causing too much distress to people around us.
Exactly, I think, and both of them are so powerful because they do get their own way, but in different ways. So, one aspect that I absolutely love about your novels is the presence of fierce female protagonists like Sita and Draupadi that you've talked about, and also Rani Jindan, whose characters drive the narrative. So, I admire how well defined they are, possessing strong voices that break barriers and challenge societal norms. How have women in your novels evolved over the years? And have they become more imaginative, responsible, independent, or is there some other dynamic at play behind the scenes?
Well, I think one of the ways in which I have evolved, and obviously the books have evolved with me, or maybe I should say the books have caused me to evolve, is my early novels, such as Sister of My Heart, and even later Oleander Girl, Before We Visit the Goddess. They're set in contemporary times. Even Mistress of Spices, which was made into a film and which is set in a magical world, it's still in contemporary times. But I think once I wrote Palace of Illusions, I fell in love with older times. It could be the world of the epic, it could be the world of the history that India has undergone. So Rani Jinda's story is set in the 1800s, and independence is set in 1946, 47, around that time. So that's one way in which my heroines have evolved is they come from different times. Therefore, the social norms for them are different at different times. So I wanted to show what their history was like, what was the world they lived in, but then I wanted to show how they had these quintessential characteristics that made them strong heroines. So even though Rani Jinda is from the 1800s, she is in many ways a very modern woman, given her time. I want to make it realistic, but the way she goes after what she wants, the way she falls in love with, she was the daughter of a dog trainer in the palace, and she falls in love with the Maharaja. And she is so intelligent and charismatic that Maharaja Ranjit Singh says, I would like to marry you, not make you into a concubine. He had lots of concubines, by the way, but he says, I respect you so much. I want you to be my queen and my last queen. After you, I don't want anyone else. So, how amazing is that? And that is not only because of her beauty, but her brains. So I always like to point out that whether historically or mythologically or in current times, my women undergo a lot of challenges and they use their brains. And I hope that is something that inspires my readers.
It definitely does. It definitely does. And I think that is something that we also see in your book, The Independence, because we see three women in Independence, and all of them are fierce. They're powerful and they have their own will. And whatever they do, you know, has a reason behind it, has a thought behind it, and they're not ones who would just step back and do anything somebody else asks them to do. They make conscious choices, and that is what defines their journey throughout the book. So, moving on to independence now, that is also the topic of the day. The book was launched in November 2022, which coincides with India's 75th anniversary of India's independence. So, was this timing intentional to highlight the significance of India's freedom struggle?
Definitely, definitely. Now, I started thinking of it some time back. After I wrote The Last Queen, I wanted to continue the historical arc. And that was the historical arc of colonialism of the British in India. Maharani Jinda was amazingly courageous and she fought very, very hard. But the time wasn't right. She didn't have the support. There was treachery in her kingdom and she lost her kingdom. She lost her kingdom. She lost her son. She did not lose her spirit, but she lost everything else. I did not want to leave my exploration of Indian history at that dark moment. So I really wanted to write a novel about when the British had to leave India. They were forced to leave India and Indians became independent. And I wanted it to coincide with the 75th anniversary. You're absolutely correct, because it was like my little gift on that occasion to all readers everywhere, because I realized this when I go to India almost every year and I talk to people as much as I can. And I realized that most Indians now, like me, were born into a free country. And we take it for granted that yes, India is independent. And we have forgotten all the struggles that people went through to make India independent. And I'm like, people, that is really an important story. We can't forget that. We really need to remember the sacrifices and honor the sacrifices. And that's what I have tried to put in Independence, which is at once the story of how we got our freedom, but also the tragic story of partition. And that's kind of important too, not to forget it so that we don't repeat the mistakes of history. And I'm kind of I was very interested in how the two publishers in the US and in India chose very different covers. I love both covers, and I'd love for readers at some point to give us feedback about which cover they like better. This one,
I
as
like
you
this
can
one
see,
better.
you do? Okay.
Yes.
This has a Kantha design. It's much more modern in some ways.
Mhm.
Uh, it's very interpretive. It has little symbols that when you read the novel, you'll understand what is the significance. So I
Exactly.
love that too.
Yeah.
And the Kantha work is from Bengal, where the book is set. So I thought that was very appropriate.
Yeah, and very beautiful. I think I picked the book first because of the cover, and I am one of those people who read books because of covers. So this cover compelled me, to pick this book up as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll pass that on to the Harper Collins and the designer of the cover.
Absolutely. I mean, that would be awesome. Okay, moving on to my next question. I had a follow-up question on independence, and that was, do you have like a personal connection or a family history that inspired you to write about the independence?
Yes, definitely. My grandfather and my maternal grandfather and my mother were both very involved. I mean, my mother grew up during that time. She was very influenced by the ideas and the experiences of that time. They were both followers of Gandhi. So a lot of the things that I've written about Gandhi and Sarojini Naidu, they were like little stories that I heard when I was growing up. My mother was also in Kolkata when Direct Action Day, the big riots happened. So some of the horrific description of those riots, the ideas or the original images came to me from stories my mother told me. And of course, after that, I did my own research. I also wanted to set this book where it is set on the eastern border, Kolkata, and then, West Bengal and East Bengal, which later, of course, becomes Bangladesh, because we don't get many stories about that part. We get a lot of stories about the Punjab border and independence and partition along that edge. But people in Bengal also suffered a great deal because of partition. It turned their lives upside down. People had to move to different sides of the border. And I wanted to just, write a story about it because so many people just don't know about it. And I knew a lot because I had been given those tales, and then I did my research. And I learned something very interesting from the research that I had done for The Last Queen. And that is something I try to do as a writer. I try to use the knowledge I've learned before to write my next book. So I learned that one of the best ways to do historical research for me, because I'm a very visual person, is to look at paintings or photographs of that time. So, and there were a lot of photographs available about right around the time of independence, from partition and the way people were trying to cross the border, but also when the first flag went up in Delhi, when Nehru gave his speech. So I used a lot of those photographs just to imagine the scenes and then put them in my books.
That's a beautiful process. I'm sure that that would have helped you a lot when working on both your novels. I mean, even The Last Queen and Independence. And wow, that's a very different perspective into how the research goes, because I always envisioned you, writers taking a look at old scriptures or textbooks, going back to libraries to figure out which novels or which works would help me give an accurate description of this particular event. But graphics and pictures, of course, are a whole new dimension to this research, and I'm sure that would have helped a lot.
Yeah, and what is funny, or, not funny, but strange, is that I hadn't intended to do that. When I was writing um, The Last Queen, I had intended to go to some of the places that had been important for Maharani Jinda, for example, Amritsar and the Golden Temple. And she had actually, there's a very important scene in the book that is set in my city, Kolkata. But just when I was getting ready, COVID struck and I couldn't go anywhere. So I was like going crazy. I was like, how am I going to write this novel? How am I going to write this novel? And then I think the divine inspiration sent me the idea, look at old pictures, look at old paintings. And that ended up being very, very useful because I looked at paintings of the marketplace in Lahore. I looked at photographs of the palace where she would have lived with Maharaja Ranjit Singh. I looked at photographs of the prison where the British put her. It was a high security prison on the edge of a river. And, it really opened up a whole other channel of imagination for me. So I learned something.
Absolutely. And you know what? I haven't read The Last Queen yet, but now that we're talking about it so much, I am so interested. I think I'm going to hit the bookstore and get it for myself tomorrow because
Sounds good.
wow, I need to read it now. Okay, moving back to independence. So when you were researching and writing the book, did you always have a clear vision of the story, the characters and their journeys, or did they evolve as you wrote?
All my books evolve. Now, I have to obviously have some ideas. So I knew the characters as they were in the beginning. I did not know how they would change. I knew they would change because obviously these, earth shattering, literally earth shattering episodes would take place and they would be thrust up against them, and that changes everybody. I knew that there were going to be three sisters. I knew that they were going to be very different. I knew some of the qualities of the sisters. I think the Priya was the one that was clearest in my mind. She already had a path. She had a strong desire. She longed to become a doctor. Very difficult for Indian women of that time, almost impossible. You could become a nurse. You could become, an alternative medicine person, doing Ayurveda and things like that, but an actual doctor, very, very difficult. Um, and so I knew that that was going to be a challenge. I knew pretty early on that there would be a tragedy in their family because so many families at that time had to undergo tragedy, and I needed to show that experience. I knew that the tragedy would transform them, as often, terrible hardships do for us. And I don't want hardship in my life. I don't want it for any of my readers, but I do want it for my characters. Because without that, there's no growth, there's no complexity. So I knew that there would be a tragedy, and they would have to take up the helms of their family and learn how to make a living, which I always think, always, is so important for women to be independent. You have to become financially viable. That is something my mother taught me when I was young, and I've always held on to that.
Absolutely. I mean, that is so true. I have kept it with me as well. My parents always taught me that financial independence is the key to success, and every woman in the family should be financially independent, should have good education such that you move on to decide what you want to become, and then earn your own money instead of being dependent on other people in your life. So I think that is something that's very, very important. I think that is a message that we get from Priya as well, and also the other characters in the book, Deepa and Jamini. So,
Yes,
moving on to the anecdotes in the book, which divide the book into parts, right? Different parts. We get glimpses of what's happening in the country, and at that point in time, which is another very beautiful aspect of the book. And this is what stood out to me from the book. I have reread those pages over and over again because it very beautifully describes what's happening in the country. Uh,
right. These are the little sections in italics
yes,
that you're talking about. Yes,
yes, exactly. And they're very beautifully written, very accurately describe what's happening in the country in such lyrical form that you are intrigued to know what's happening at that point in time. And then they also are woven very beautifully with the narrative of the story, what's happening at that point in the character's life. So, how did you balance historical accuracy with the fictional elements of the story? I'm sure those are two very different things, and weaving them together would have been a difficult process.
it was challenging. And what is interesting is that the book just started as the story of the three sisters. But after a little bit, when I'd written a little bit, I realized I had to write those short italicized sections because they were like a bird's eye view of what's going on in the whole country. And the novel is not only about the sisters, but it's really about the country and the way in which the country is changing, growing, going through turmoil, and the tragedy, the violence, the hope that everyone is feeling. So I needed the macrocosm and I needed the microcosm of the sisters' lives. So I'm very thankful that that idea came to me when I was almost halfway through the novel, and then I went back and I wrote those sections. And I think, I'm so glad you like them because I think they do add a whole other dimension to what was going on. They put things in perspective. It's not just a personal story. Yes, the personal element of any historical fiction is important, but the historical element is crucial because that shapes the characters' lives. And I needed to show that in an objective manner.
Absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense because those parts, I mean, they give you an insight into what's happening in the background, which makes the story of the characters even more rich. So when you read them, you know what's happening in the background, and which is why these characters are behaving like this, and which is
Exactly.
what's happening.
Exactly. We understand the motivations of the characters much more, I think, because of these historical sections. And the very last historical section addresses the reader. So, it's bringing the story back or forward into our time, saying, now that you've seen this story, you have a responsibility. What are you going to do? Because
Right? I was actually thinking.
that's what I've always wanted, to bring the reader into the world so that the story changes the reader in some way, even if it's in a small way. That's always my hope as a writer.
Absolutely. I mean, that actually made me wonder if there would be a sequel to Independence. I mean, we did see a conclusion, but the last section of the book made me wonder if there would be a sequel. And I mean, not right now, maybe years down the line, you might think that, it's time to maybe write another book on independence.
Maybe, who knows? One can never tell. So I have this earlier book, novel, Sister of My Heart, okay, which is about two cousins growing up in India and all of their adventures and how they get married into very different families and how the one of how at the end they both move to the United States for different reasons, not at the same time, for different reasons. And when I finished that book, I thought I was done. But then some years later, that story started just bothering me. It was in my head, it was going round and round. And I knew that that was not the end of the sister's story. And then I had to write the sequel, which is titled Vine of Desire. So I never know when, the writing bug will catch me and say, all right, you have to go back to that. So who knows? So I never say no.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that would be a great thing to write about. I mean, I would be definitely interested to learn more about this Three Sisters story going forward as well. But I have a follow-up question on this. Do you have a favorite character from the novel, from the Three Sisters? And which character was the most challenging to pen down?
Okay, I'll start with your second question. Definitely, Jamini was the most challenging character to write because she is so unusual. She's not like a regular heroine. For one, she has, a physical challenge. She is also the middle child, and you will not believe how many middle children have written to me after this novel said, this is exactly my problem. My parents love the older one for being the oldest. They love the younger one for being the youngest. What about me? They forget about me. And that is one of Jamini's problems. She feels unloved, and therefore she will do a lot of things what she considers necessary for to be loved. And that's it's just how it is. So
Absolutely. I mean,
she was
she was a very complex character, and it's hard to like her also in the book, but towards the end, you kind of understand that whatever she was doing came from some, background, and it wasn't only because she was evil. She wasn't.
She
It
wasn't.
happens.
And she goes through some really traumatic situations, which certainly I hope will make readers more um, understanding of her, but also sympathetic to her. And I think, I was surprised. My characters often surprise me. So her decision at the end kind of surprised me when I saw it coming up. So I think she has grown the most. I do like the other sisters a lot. And I think maybe Priya is my favorite because, my mother, when she was growing up, uh, Priya's father is somewhat modeled on my own grandfather, who was a doctor and who also had a village clinic. So I think, and my mother wanted to be a doctor, but it wasn't possible for her at that time. So, I think Priya's desire, her goal, her single pointed focus on her career was something that resonated with me. So maybe she is, in some ways, my favorite character, although all the characters, they're complicated and sometimes they're doing things and I'm like, oh, why are you doing this? Now, I don't control my characters. They really come out of their own personality and the situation. So sometimes Priya is doing something, I'm like, no, it would be nice if she did the other thing, but then I look at her character and she wouldn't do that. It's not natural for her to do that. So I have to let my characters make their mistakes or say the things that they later regret. And I think that's what makes a book come alive and makes it interesting because, you know, you never know what's coming up. Even I,
Absolutely.
as a writer, don't really always know what's coming up.
That is actually so true. You let the characters define their journey after a certain point in time, giving them the basic characteristics, and then they hold your hand and then tell them this is what I'm going to do after a certain point, and you will have to write that because that's my journey. So
Yeah.
such a beautiful process.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, you were saying something?
No, I was just agreeing with you that it's a beautiful and sometimes frustrating process. I'm like, no, 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 don't go there. Oh my God, you're breaking my heart. But you have to respect the character's choice.
Absolutely. I mean, that is so true. And actually, that is what makes a novel come to life and makes it all the more real instead of, giving them something that they probably wouldn't want to do at some point in time and which would
Because
ruin the character
if the
arc.
character becomes unrealistic, the reader will not be able to relate to them, right? The reader will kind of fall out of the story saying, oh, no, 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 I don't see this character behaving like this. So I have to be very careful and make sure that the character is dynamic and is acting out of their own agency, even when they're making wrong choices.
Absolutely. I mean, that is exactly what makes the novel better than the other works because I have seen read works wherein the character is behaving in erratic ways, and you wouldn't want that because that's like, probably this is not what the character should be doing at this point in time. Because after you read a lot, you understand that character journey is very, very important from point A to point B to throughout the book. And when the character reaches the end, they should have grown in some aspect because you see that journey of growth, how the character is growing. It's not necessary that the person or the character in the book is growing in a positive manner. They could have turned into complete evil, but the growth is very important.
You've said it really well. And that's exactly what I feel. It's not necessary that the journey is always positive, but there has to be a journey and there has to be change. That's at least how I approach the books I write.
Okay, awesome. So, moving on to the next question, I want to know if there was some surprising discovery when you were working on your book, The Independence, and especially because you would have read a lot about what happened at that point in time when the partition of India was happening. So, was there some surprising story or discovery that you came across when researching for the book?
Yeah, there were a couple of things that really struck me. Well, more than a couple. One was how women were such a big part of our independence, and we've kind of forgotten. We have maybe one or two, like we remember Rani Lakshmi Bai and uh, people like that. But really, even Sarojini Naidu, she has kind of been sidelined, but she was so central at that time for her to come out of her very protected and privileged background, family background, and to march side by side with Gandhi. And she was thrown into jail like Gandhi. She was beaten up. And then, she gathered all her strength. She went to England to fight for the cause of India. But how many people know her story? She's almost forgotten unless, someone gives you a I don't know, an assignment to do research on her. She's almost forgotten. So I wanted to bring these women's stories back into the book. The other one who's mentioned more briefly is Matangini Hazra, who was a Bengali freedom fighter who acted much older than Gandhi. She joined this freedom fight. She was illiterate, but she was so inspired that she joined the freedom fight. And in fact, she was shot dead when she was marching carrying the Indian flag. And we've completely forgotten about her. So one of I think my projects here was to remind people that women played a big part in our independence struggle. And we have to honor that and be inspired by them. So that was something that really struck me, I think, as I was writing and researching this book. And
That's
again, I think it struck me because my books are women centered, and I wanted to. It fit right along with what I like doing.
I think that's a very beautiful thing to look at because I know myself I haven't heard a lot about people talking about women from the independence era. People don't talk about women from that point in time. Even Sarojini Naidu, people mention it very infrequently, not as much as we would like. We hear a lot
Just
about
in
Mahatma
passing,
Gandhi. Yes,
right? Just in
exactly. Yeah.
passing. Oh, yes, Sarojini Naidu. She used to write poetry. She was in the freedom struggle, but she was very central.
Exactly. We don't hear debates about her. We hear people talking actively about Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru. We don't hear people talking about women at all. Even Rani Lakshmibai, we've read about her in textbooks, but we don't hear people talking about her. Like nobody comes and says, that this is something exceptional that she did at that point in time. But
Yeah.
so
And
that's
Maharani Jinda, who was one of the early freedom fighters, people have completely forgotten about her. She's not even in textbooks, most textbooks. I had not heard about her until I came across her, quite magically at a much later point in my life. So, yes, I think it is important as a culture and a country for us to remember our women and to honor the work they have done and the sacrifices that they have made.
absolutely. I think that is very true, and I respect you for doing that because not a lot of people bring out the stories of women, and the way you portray these characters and the way you help shed light into the lives of these women, it is very, very important, both culturally and for us as women as well, to learn to have role models that are actually women and not men. I mean, very rarely do I hear people, even the women in my life, having role models who are women because they don't have anybody to look forward to, especially not from their own country. They don't find anybody in their own country to look forward to, and that is very important. I think one
I
aspect
think,
that's missing.
yes, that point that you made right at the end is so important. We need to find heroines of our own culture and our own background. Yes, we live in a global world, but how important it is, especially for our girls, right? Younger women, to find role models that are from their culture, their society, that are saying, you can make changes right here. Look, I made changes right here when I was under a lot of distress. And therefore, the mythological heroines are important for that same reason, too. They go way back into our culture.
Exactly. I think that is so beautiful. And thank you so much for helping women of a country get more information, more insight, and in-depth insight into all of these beautiful characters and the way you've portrayed them. It is really remarkable.
Well, thank you so much. That has been one of my goals, I think, as a writer, but it's only possible when people read my books. So I thank you for bringing my work to so many other people in your book club and also outside of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I love your work and I would not shy away ever from talking about it. So definitely going to do that more and more. Um, Also, the next question from the book Independence is on music, which plays a significant role in the story. I mean, we hear bits and pieces in different sections of the book. How did you choose the songs that are featured in the book? And what significance do they hold in the entire narrative?
Well, those songs, I was told by my grandfather and my mother, a number of those songs were banned by the British because they really became like marching songs, like Akla Chalo Re, which was one of Gandhiji's favorites, was banned. You could not, you could not sing it, you could not hear it because the British saw that that was creating a spirit of power and independence in the people, a desire for independence in the people. So, there's a lot of historical evidence about particular songs. And then I remembered growing up listening to these songs because the Tagore songs, the Nazrul songs, they're just such a big part of Bengali culture, at least when I was growing up. And I wanted to bring them back. I wanted to have people listen. And the publisher has put a QR code inside the book, which allows people to listen freely to all these songs. So, I really recommend that everyone should find that QR code and, you know, it's somewhere. There is a QR code, I know that,
I am looking for it now because I don't know if I ever saw it before. Okay, I
yeah,
don't
it's
see a
somewhere.
QR code here.
Let me see if I can find it. While you're asking me the next question, I will look for the QR code as well. Here you go. I see my QR code right
Oh,
here.
okay.
Yeah. It's just before the in on the contents page. It's on one side of the contents page.
Okay, now I found it too. Yeah,
Yes. So
sure.
people, everybody, feel free to listen to all of these songs. In fact, I recommend you listen to all of these songs because then you'll really feel the novel much more. I think music is so powerful. The other thing that I wanted to point out through these songs were that the freedom struggle was not a Hindu struggle or a Muslim struggle. We managed to make India independent because, at least for a while, everyone came together, right? And therefore, there are songs by Nazrul of Muslim background and of Tagore of Hindu background. But the background didn't matter. What mattered, as Nazrul says, we are all children of the same mother, Mother India. And I think that's very important because for India to be, I don't know, as to reach her full potential, she has to embrace all her people. This is what happened during independence and allowed us to gain independence. And it is something I think for us all to remember as we see right now the world is in a very separatist mode. All over the world, we have these, uh, these people who say, okay, they're not like us, therefore I don't want anything to do with them. And, I think we should just look back at history and how India became independent. It's a good lesson to learn from history, to be embracive.
Absolutely. I think that is such a beautiful takeaway from the book as well, that you see parts of history and you read about it and you realize that it's not only one community that was working for independence. Everybody was involved, the whole country, irrespective of the caste, creed, religion. They weren't thinking about it at that point in time because they were like, we need to get India independent first. That is something we'll think about at a later point. But right now, we really need to think about what's important. What's important is that we
Coming
need to figure.
together, coming together. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. And I
yeah.
think we see a lot of that.
We are so much stronger when we can come together. That's just a fact of history.
Very true. Very true. I think, and we need to take that message, especially at this point in time, and understand that, all of this wave of separation and needs to be, not thought of at this point in time. We need to think about India as a whole and not different communities in the country, not think about the divisions.
Right. We want to encourage everyone to think Indian first. Everything else is
Exactly.
fine. Indian first.
Right, right. Okay, we're heading into the final sections of this, and before I move on to the next section, there are like two more questions that I want to ask. One is that you've been a pioneer in your field with numerous works already out in the world, many of which have been critically acclaimed by readers. Millions have read and appreciated your writing, your craft, and your storytelling. So, on that note, what advice would you like to give to writers who aspire to blend historical events with fictional narratives as seamlessly as you have?
I would say, first of all, choose your subject carefully. It has to be a subject that will resonate with readers today. So you must think, what are the universal qualities of the characters that I'm going to write about, especially my main character? What are the qualities that people today will resonate with and learn from? And therefore, you have to choose the right kind of character. And then you have to do really, responsible research because a retelling of history should be accurate. In my mind, it should be accurate. Otherwise, a retelling of mythology, I think we can add much more of our own imaginations because it is a world that goes way back and we don't know so much about the world. But history, there's really a lot of evidence there. So let's use that evidence for our purposes. And we want to use that evidence so that no one can later come back and tell us, oh, you just made this up. This didn't happen. So I'm not going to pay attention to what you're saying about that character or that portion of history. So, and the character has to be universal and modern in some ways. Yes, from that time, but with qualities that modern readers can learn from and can really identify with.
That makes a lot of sense, and I hope that this will help writers who are actually listening to this interview understand that what they need to do next and how they can better write and work on their novels. And my last question before the book club section is that could you share some book recommendations with us, especially the ones written by Indian authors that you've read and loved? I'm specifically asking for Indian authors here because I, as a reader, am not very exposed to Indian literature. I mean, I read a lot of novels, but I don't read writers that are from India specifically.
Absolutely. I'll recommend two writers right away. And one is Amitabh Ghosh. He has a lot of beautiful novels, historical novels that deal with uh, many different eras of India. I recommend his Sea of Poppies. I think that would be a wonderful place for people to start, or even The Glass Palace, which is about people of Indian origin in Burma, and how when world wars were going on, how those people came back to India and how their lives were impacted by the wars. I would also recommend Gitanjali Shree's book Tomb of Sand, because that is just a wonderful book. It is a book about, it's set during partition and afterwards, and it's very funny. And that is so amazing and original that a book set in those tragic times can also become funny. And the main character is an older woman, but she is like an old lady, but she is so funny and charming and just complex that I recommend both of those books for all our readers here, right after they've read all of mine.
Absolutely. I mean, definitely, I would always recommend they start with your works because I've read so many of your works and I've absolutely related with them, especially because of the female protagonist thing. Uh, I think as I've grown as a reader, I've noticed that I've started loving books which have a strong female protagonist. And if a book does not have that, I find something missing from the book and I'm unable to relate with it. And I happen to leave it midway and not finish it. So I think this has helped me grow as well. Your writings have helped me grow as a reader and as a person and identify with so many role models that essentially did not exist in my life before. So thank you so much for that.
No, thank you. That makes me very happy to hear that. That is my hope, that readers will feel that. And I do hope that, I know I have a lot of female readers, and I appreciate every single one of them. But I'm making this request to you and to all of our listeners. Please share the books with the men in your lives, and if possible, have a dialogue about the books, because that's really important. Women will change their ideas about womanhood. Women will get inspired by other women more easily. It's important for men also to be inspired by strong women characters and to welcome that strength in women in their own lives.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure that people will take this feedback and go back to their families and share this book with their brothers, with their partners, with their sons and daughters, so that they get an insight into what the life of women actually looks like. Because I think that's very important. Women will learn from women, but men also need to learn from women's experiences. And with that, I'm going to dive into the questions from my book club. The first question I'm going to address is from a college friend of mine, and she was the first person to introduce me to your novels. So I'm going to honor her request and ask you the question that she has asked. And her question is that her name is Ruheen, by the way, and she has asked that if you were a reader reading your works from a bird's eye view, which novel would be your favorite?
I think I would say Palace of Illusions, and Forest of Enchantments is a close second. So when people ask which book of yours should I read first, I tell them, and I always say, if you like mythology or if you like strong women, start with Palace of Illusions.
Oh my God, that's awesome. I always recommend Palace of Illusions as the first book as well, and then only I later go on to the other books. So okay. The next question is from Mayank Dobhal, who is a book club member, and he's asked, where do you find ideas for your stories, and how do you realize that they are good enough to be turned into a book?
I think as writers, we have to be open to ideas all the time. I used to go around with a writer's notebook, which would always be in my purse or my backpack. And anytime I came across an idea, I would just write it down. Now I have a smartphone, so I can just take notes on my smartphone. But I never know where the idea will come from. It's really interesting because, for The Last Queen, I had no idea that I was going to write this novel. And I was at a book festival in Kolkata at the Column Book Festival, and somebody was presenting, William Dalrymple was presenting a book on the Kohinoor, and he was talking about people who had owned the Kohinoor. And for a moment, he flashed this picture, which is a historical painting, and he said, well, Maharani Jinda for a while owned this. And when I looked at her face, I was inspired. And then I wrote it down and I said, let me go and research her. And then I found out that she had an amazing story that most people didn't know about. So all the time, just be open. You never know where the next story idea is waiting for you.
Wow, that is so inspiring. And I'm sure that whoever is a writer listening to this, they would be taking back this feedback, thinking on everyday activities and thinking more closely into what they can turn into a book. Next is a question from Mahima, who wants to know that do you read book reviews and what kind of feedback or critique do you seek that helps you improve as a writer?
I do read book reviews. I read all of them. And what really helps me is when people talk about the creation of the world and the creation of the characters and what works for them. And if something hasn't worked for them, that is also good for me to know because, that's feedback I can use to improve my books later. What does not help me is their random opinions about the subject matter, because I already have decided that that subject matter is important. And, no matter what they say, that subject matter is going to remain important to me. So if someone says, oh, why is she writing about mythology? That's not helpful for me because I've already decided that that's my writing path. But about characters, about situations, about plot twists, anything that people have to say is very helpful. What works, of course, I like knowing that. But if something isn't working, that's also important for me to know. So I don't shy away from those things either.
Got it. Got it. Makes sense. Next is a question from Bijoyati, who wants to know, as being a Bengali, have you read Rajshekhar Babu's rendition of Mahabharat? And if so, then did that in any way influence the Palace of Illusions?
Yes, I have. And yes, that was interesting. But what really influenced me is a much older text, Kashiram Das. He was writing around, I think, 1400s, 1500s. He wrote the Bengali version of Mahabharat in poetry. And, I had a copy of that. My grandfather had a copy of that, and sometimes he would read from it. And that was really an influence for me.
Okay,
So
absolutely
Kashi
love.
Ram Das,
Okay,
available everywhere now.
I think I should take a look at that book as well, Kashi Ramdas. Going to keep a note of it. Um, then the last question is from Ishita, who has asked that your works, Palace of Illusions, Forest of Enchantments, and The Last Queen, explore the lesser known or unheard stories of historically significant women. How do you go about the research for these lesser known stories?
It's difficult, right? Because they're lesser known, they're not available easily, especially for the last queen. Let me tell you, there are hundreds of books on her husband, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and he was a wonderful person, no doubt about it. There's not a single book in English that I could find about her, like a whole book dedicated to her. Uh, there would be a paragraph here, there'd be a paragraph there. I had to do so much research in so many different books to find really the line of her life, what was actually going on, what happened first, what happened next. What did she actually write to the governor general? How did she escape from the high security prison? Little snippets here and there. I really had to do a lot of research, but that's what made it important and worthwhile, because I knew people would not easily get her story. Nobody had put it together in a whole book, certainly not in imaginative form using her own voice. And that's another thing I like to do with many of my novels, but certainly my historical and mythological novels, which is give the woman her own voice, let her tell her own story. So that's kind of part of my process. Get material from many sources, put it together, and put it in the vision of the woman, in the words of the woman herself.
Wow, that's a beautiful, beautiful process. And I'm sure that we're going to get a lot of uh, such women-centric stories from you in the future as well. Really hoping and really looking forward to the next book that you're writing. I hope we get another female protagonist, a very strong female character in that work of yours as well. I don't want to, ruin this experience of mine of finding out what's going to happen. So I'm not going to ask many questions on that. I will wait to figure out what happens in the book. But I think with that, we have come to an end of this discussion. So thank you so much, Ms. Divakaruni, for joining us today and for engaging in such a heartfelt discussion about your brilliant and captivating novels that leave readers in awe of your work. I'm certain this conversation will inspire my readers and everybody else to explore your works, read Independence and The Palace of Illusions and The Forest of Enchantments and The Last Queen and all your other works as well. And thank you, fellow readers, for tuning into this conversation. If you haven't read Independence yet, go get it at a bookstore near you. Also, read all other works of Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. I'm sure you're going to be surprised with the kind of beautiful literature you'll find in the book. Until then, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and follow us on Instagram. I'll add Ms. Divakaruni's Insta handle also in the description so you guys can follow her as well. I'm sure you're already following her, but in case you aren't, you can go follow her. And if you like this discussion, give us a big fat thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next episode.